Everybody. My name is Judy Gilmore. I'm the director at Opauka Gallery, and tonight is the last in our series of dispatches from the Iowa booth with artist Terry James Conrad. And we are so excited tonight to present from the booth with Terry, artist Brian Dewan, who has been here several times during the exhibition. Has been really wonderful to get to know him a little and to hear his amazing sounds and see his amazing machines. So it's going to be a real treat for everyone who's joining tonight. Just a quick few announcements. The show is still open, the exhibition that is, through Saturday. So please, you have a couple more days if you've not seen the show, please do come in. We also have a wonderful website where we have archived a lot of the programming, wonderful 3D tour of the show, great images. So if you've not been able to join in person, there is the exhibition website. You can find that through our website, which is opauka.sage.edu/exhibitions. So please go there if you're interested in seeing some of the past dispatches, other tours that we've done, and some other content that's on that site. I also want to mention that we are doing a catalog for the show, a wonderful catalog that will be published after the show. Pre-orders for that are available online if you go to opauka.sage.edu/Conrad book.
How you doing?
You can pre-order a catalog there. So please, if you're interested, do go ahead and pre-order
Zoom, but he's
a great time to please ask everyone to mute their microphones. That would be really helpful. We are going to do a presentation tonight that is pre-recorded. It's about a 20-minute pre-recording of music that Brian and Terry made that showcases Terry's instruments, some of Brian's instruments. After that pre-recorded piece is played, we are going to then turn it over for a conversation with Terry and Brian, and then there will be a chance for question and answers. So please do feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will call on you to then ask those questions live if you don't mind. If you want us to just ask them for you, just put a little note in the chat. Also, if you're not on our mailing list, the chat's a great place to throw that that info if you want us to sign you up. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Terry, and as soon as he lets me know, I'm going to share this wonderful video.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much, Judy. So right now you can see that Brian is sitting in the Iowa booth in my exhibition, Object Permanence at Opauka Gallery. The booth plays on the design of an antique voting booth. But the Iowa booth is an educational space, a space to share ideas, a space to embrace our current time of Zoom life, functioning as a broadcast booth during the duration of the exhibition. Tonight, it's a performance venue. This is our final episode, and I want to thank Opauka Gallery and Sage College for the opportunity. I especially want to thank Gallery Director Judy Gilmore and Coordinator of Exhibitions and Programming, Amy Griffin, for all the scheming and all the planning that it took to put all this together. It's been an incredible opportunity and a great experiment, really, the dispatches from the Iowa booth. For tonight, I want to also thank Ryan Jenkins and Michael Van Winkle for help video, for the videography for some of tonight's presentation. So Brian Dewan is an artist who works in many media, including art, music, audiovisual performances, decorative painting, furniture design, poetry, musical instrument design. Dewan writes, narrates, and illustrates film strips as well. He also has produced 4 albums of songs as a solo artist, as well as performed on many collaborations. He has several releases. A lot of them can be found on Bandcamp, so I suggest you check that out. Brian lives in Catskill, New York, and his artwork is represented by Pierogi Gallery in New York. The past 5 weeks, Brian has generously met at least once a week here in the gallery with me. We spent time recording video and sound. We'll be presenting some of those recordings tonight. We've recorded some of my noisemakers that are in the show, as well as a few instruments he has made, including synthesizers that he built and invented with his cousin Leon Dewan. as always, when you spend time with Brian, I learned a lot. His knowledge of sound and music is encyclopedic. His love for art is truly inspiring. After the presentation, there'll be time for questions for Brian or myself. Now it's a pleasure and an honor and a dream, actually, to get to share this collaboration with Brian Dewan tonight. So take it away, Judy.
Okay, we're back.
Hello. Hey, Brian.
Hey there. Hey, Terry.
How's it going? Good work. So I was gonna maybe ask the first question for you.
Okay.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in synthesizers?
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly my most formative experience with it was with a machine that was not made to be an instrument. That was at Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts, where my father worked for many, many years. And for my brother's birthday, when we were children, he took us in with a couple of friends, and there was this machine with these knobs and toggle switches. And us kids were kind of turned loose on them and making a racket with electronic noise. Well, later I found out many years later that, what the thing was. And it was, they were doing research about speech synthesis in the 60s. And that's what this machine was for. I remember how exciting that was and how it was mysterious what the different knobs and switches did. But as you moved them, it would change what you could hear from a speaker. Plus, there are other kids throwing switches and knobs too. So it was hard to know who was doing what. And then, later on, I really enjoyed hearing electronic music records like Claude Dejuan or Jean-Jacques Perret and Gershon Kingsley, and these Moog records that were popular in the 70s that were very whimsical records of popular songs covered with, but featuring the Moog synthesizer. And I was very excited by the record jackets of these records that would show a photograph of the Moog synthesizer, and it had a keyboard, but mostly it was this wall of jacks and knobs and all these cables spilling all over the place and burying the keyboard. And I remember being impressed at how the keyboard was so buried under the spaghetti of wires. It seemed so crazy. And then you would hear these sounds. So that got me excited about electronic music.
That's really beautiful. So everybody, just so you know, if you have a question, you can write it right into the chat if you like, or if you'd like to ask the question, you can say, I have a question. But in the meantime, Brian, I sort of have another question.
Okay.
So you, in your other collection of, you have a lot of different kinds of music that you've made. And I'm curious about jumping back and forth. Do you ever play shows where you jump back and forth working acoustically and the synthesizer? And
well, I suppose in some shows I have had a mixture. I mean, sometimes it's usually, I will sing songs with an instrument like accordion or auto harp or zither and accompany myself singing. And that's kind of like a storytelling show almost. But then also with electronic instruments, mostly, it's more abstract. It's more about sound and things unfolding in time. And there isn't a verbal element to it, but sometimes there is. I mean, sometimes I did some electronic concerts where I thought it would be interesting to deliver some poetry or some sort of vocal element that wasn't necessarily singing, and do that while making electronic music. And in that case, it might be a synthesizer, or it might be, tapes, 8-track tape plate, 8-track tapes that have been erased and new sounds put on them. So they're just used as these kind of long tape loop buckets of noises that you don't know what you're going to get when you do, but you know that whatever you fish out in just some small excerpt is going to be different than before. So it's all about just using a little bit of whatever happens to emerge on the tape. And you can skate the head around on the tape and crossfade rapidly to different tracks. So it's a really nice hands-on live musique concrète thing to do. So I like both of those things, and sometimes they don't overlap, but occasionally they do.
Cool. We have a question from Dawn DeShaw, and she asks, Brian, can you tell us about the instrument behind you?
Oh yeah, well, this was an instrument that my cousin Leon Dejuan and I made together. So we thought the whole thing up together, and then he made the circuit boards, which are oscillators, envelope generators, and filters, and timers. And I made this casing console, and we made a number of instruments together over the years. This one we'd only made 2 versions of. We made a bigger, more elaborate version one later that comes apart into sections so that you can actually get it on an airplane. Well, we took this thing on an airplane once, and that was the only time. It was just too unwieldy and got in too much trouble. What's that? So anyway, but it did make it through security because people assume that it's a bomb because it is decorative. So anyway, so it really is a kind of a batch of synthesizers, and it's made for 2 people to play is the idea, although, you know, I guess any number of people could play it. But you have 2 facing controls of identical controls. So there are 4 rows of knobs, and each one of those is a synthesizer that can be fired off independently. And there are electronic timers in the instrument, and you assign different noises, different numbers. They could have the same number, but they're independent. And then every time the pulse of a beat goes off, it will count to a number and throw off a noise every 3 beats or every 5 beats or every 8 beats for what you dial in. So that's what it is. It's a synthesizer. It's not a keyboard instrument. And it makes pitches and white noise, you know, mostly kind of percussive or abstract sounds. But it's for generating these rhythmic patterns that you can't necessarily predict because you set these different numbers off of each other and they go in and out of phase and start making these patterns. So often people think it's a sequencer, but there is no programmed sequence. It's just that each noise is going off strictly every certain number of counts, and you can shuffle around where they start. And then all these patterns can start emerging, either simple ones or complex ones. So that's what it is.
And what's its title?
It's called the Dual Primate Console because of its being set up for 2 people to play. Well, I remember being very excited by, I have a record of piano pieces that are for 2 pianos, written for 2 pianists. And on the cover was this wonderful instrument that was this big, long rectangular piano with a keyboard on each side. It was really like 2 grand pianos that were nested together. But instead of just rolling 2 pianos up like that, it's actually built into a single case as a single standing instrument that 2 pianists would play. And I was very excited about that.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. One follow-up. What's the in the center? There's the telephone dial.
Yeah.
What is
Yeah,
that?
each side has a telephone dial, and that's how to tell the numbers to the controls. Like if you want a certain, let's say this upper channel, you know, that's like filtered white noise, it's got making a percussive noise, and you want to tell it, okay, I want that one to go off every 7 beats. You clear out a number by pushing a button, and then you dial the 7 on the telephone dial, and then that gives it the number, and then you press a button, and then it gets the 7 from the number reservoir. So every other button you press for the other ones will get whatever number is sitting in the, I'll call it the number tank. And then if you want to change that, then you press the clear button and you dial in a different number. And then you tell, you know, oh, this note, low note will only come in every 15 beats. So sometimes they might all have the number 8 and they're doing some kind of a 4/4 rhythm that's discernible. But sometimes you can set up a bunch of odd numbers against each other and they do all kinds of funny herky-jerky things.
Yeah, wow.
So that's what those telephone numbers or dials are for, is to assign the numbers to the different synthesizers and tell them how many counts until they're allowed to fire.
Wow, brilliant.
And we have a question from Andrea. Her hand is up.
Yes.
So Andrea, if you could unmute. There.
I just unmuted and muted. Hi.
Hi.
First of all, this makes me so happy. I don't know why it makes me happy, but electronic music is making me happy. I have a question that I know quite a few years ago, there was a group in Manhattan who did electronic music with something called a scopatone. Are you familiar with that at all, or am I just too ancient to?
Well, I mean, maybe when I think of the word scopatone, I think of that as referring to a kind of a early music video, like it was like probably a 16 millimeter film, and then it's set up in a machine that's like a jukebox, but with a back projected movie projector film.
Oh.
But it could also be, you might be thinking of a similar word. I'm trying to think of another thing that's maybe like a scopatone. You know, you got your oscillators and your oscilloscopes. So you have all these sort of different common threads with these different things. But I think the term scopatone might be this kind of film jukebox thing from the 60s.
You know what? You're right. That was the wrong word.
But you know what you might be thinking of? There was something called a Psych Tone, which was a synthesizer that was made by a kit company, I think in Texas in the 60s and early 70s. And then there was an article in Popular Mechanics magazine showing people how they could make their own Psych Tone, you know, and Psych is, you know, PSYCHE -tone, the Psych Tone. And I've only seen one of those ever, but in person. But I did see the Popular Mechanics article about it. I loved the idea of people making their own Psych Tone things at home in the early 70s from the schematics they put in the magazine. Well, one thing that was interesting in that magazine too is there was an article about people making, you know, electronic music by cutting tape. But instead of it's being in the context of a conservatory or an academic electronic music setting, it was being presented as a kind of a democratic home hobby to do in your garage. You can get this tape recorder and slice tape with a razor blade and stick them together and make crazy sounds.
Well, this was like a strange like wire thing, and the depth of where you put your hands would make the different sounds around this. I guess this is
yes,
obscure. What was that called?
And that was the Theremin.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well done. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure. And that's a wonderful thing. And really the earliest electronic instrument there ever was. You know, it's over 100 years old now. And that you never touch it. You just wave your arms near and from two antennas.
That's the one that goes, right?
That's exactly correct.
Yes.
That's what it says.
And I'm not 100 years old, so I don't remember that.
Well, it was before your time.
And Brian, you're working on a collaboration with some Theremin player, is that right?
Well, I know the Theremin player Pamela Stickney, who is quite wonderful, and we've often collaborated together. I mean, not often because she lives in Austria for the last dozen years, but sometimes she comes to the States to do gigs, and we perform live together, and that's a lot of fun. Well, last time she was here, we did a bunch of recording at my house, so I'm glad we did. I'm going to finish those up as soon as I get my tape recorder back from the shop.
So we have a question from Soup Plantation that I have a feeling might be Tommy Santa Claus. I'm not sure, but when will the Conrad Dejuan record be released?
Soon.
Soon.
Well, we got
Well-
to get it together first, but as soon as we do, then who's to stop us from releasing it? We'll just open the window and say, fly away.
Yeah. I should announce we've been talking about this project called Electronics Club, which is a catch-all for every idea that we've come up with in the past 5 weeks. I believe Judy Gilmore has a question for us,
Okay.
or for Brian.
Hi guys, I would like to be the first fan of the Electronics Club. So, I was there at the beginning in some way.
Yeah.
No, it was fabulous to see. First of all, I don't know when you did this all. I don't know where we were in the gallery, but it's so fun to see how much you did in this space. So thank you. And it's interesting because you guys both have such different ways of making instruments, but they're both like super analog. And I'm curious, Brian, does like the analog digital conversation, is that even interesting to you? I mean, I in terms of
Well,
music and making.
No, I mean, I don't think of them as being natural enemies, even though I see why people do think that. I mean, I'm interested in tangible processes, but I use digital stuff. I mean, but for me, it's more for organizing things or for editing things. But it's just a matter of what you want to do and how you want to get there. I mean, to me, analog means some sort of a continuous process, and digital is about discrete processes, or everything can be analyzed into defined discrete elements. And that if you need to make a curve, you have to do it with some stair steps. And if you have enough of them, then you get a good resolution, and to the point where in theory you can't tell the difference. But I just feel like so many things, a continuous process lends itself to some tasks and not as well to others. And the same is true with digital, and each one can often accomplish a goal that is difficult for the other one. But I think to a lot of people, there's this other metaphor that becomes projected onto it, where analog is tangible and intuitive, and digital is analytical and modern, and analog is old-fashioned. And I understand why those associations are in place, but to me, I generally am not thinking about that. Or maybe just because I'm used to analog. I had a young friend visit me and saw these shelves full of cassettes, and she was very excited. And she said, "Oh, are you really into tape?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm just old, but I have the tapes and I am into them. But if I didn't already have them, I probably wouldn't be loading up on cassettes." And I'm also, I love cassettes too, but to me, they're not exotic. So it's always interesting to think of how always through the ages with the different generations, one generation is accustomed to one thing as just being a routine, ubiquitous, everyday thing. And then it goes extinct and it becomes an exotic and venerated object. But in the interim, there's always the point where it's freshly out of fashion and held irrationally in contempt and thought of as garbage before it can then be elevated to the exalted, exotic historical object that is to be revered.
Well said. I think that's great. Just to follow up, you both are clearly makers of beautiful visual things, as well as makers of music, and not a lot of people like meld those together. And was it always obvious to you to do both? And I mean, did you keep them separate? How do they live in your creative life together? I'm curious.
You mean visual and sound endeavors?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just feel like things fall into place naturally, where some things combine both and others are just one and not the other. And sometimes even something that's just visual art has a musical character, even though it isn't music. Right now I'm thinking particularly of the artist Lionel Feininger, whose paintings I love and are really very musical. So I wasn't that shocked when many years later I found out that he wrote organ fugues in 1920 and 1921. And I thought, like, well, his paintings are so musical. I didn't know that he wrote music for organ, and that he was way into Bach, but he did it with like this much more out there harmony. But every other way it was like Baroque music. And I love all of his art and the toys that he made for his children, which I didn't know about until later, or the comics that he made in 1906, I think, that are these like beautiful phantasmagorical illustrations, which were also like very fluid and modern for the time. But he's known mostly for his abstract painting, being an early abstract painter. But he did so many other things that he's not known for. And I loved his stuff for so many years before I even had an inkling that he composed music.
That's great. Thank you.
That was a great question. And I think as sort of a closing, I kind of have a closing question that, you know, Brian, you did go to school for both music and art, and particularly organ music and art. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was, you know, I went to school where there was a college and a conservatory that weren't the same, but they were, you know, interconnected. So I was a college student and I was an art major there, but I got to study music in the conservatory without actually being a conservatory student. So that was where I got to study organ composition and electronic music. And I had a wonderful composition teacher who I think was kind of unappreciated then, but I thought he was wonderful. His name was Joe Wood. Well, it's funny because he was dogged by this rumor, I guess, the whole time he was there. You know, Joe Wood wrote Looney Tunes. Like he wrote the music for the cartoons. And I admired that music. And I thought it was some gig that he did as a young man that he didn't think of as anything to be proud of, but that I thought was wonderful. But to him, it was just a gig. And one day I asked him about it and I said, did you ever do any work for Warner Brothers? And he looked out of the office of his window and didn't say anything. And he said, it's untrue. It's absolutely untrue that I wrote Looney Tunes.
So I just wanted to kind of dig into the organ thing because that is how I met you, and you know, kind of fun to think about. I just wanted to mention future projects, but for you know, maybe a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago now, Brian started playing the organ in our tiny village north of here, about 45 minutes in Round Lake. And so I think that that's an ongoing project that we're going to see a little bit of from Brian in the future. But it's I find the organs in general are just amazing instrument tool that you know, require your whole body, and I think it's just a really cool thing.
It's interesting, you know, because looking at your apparatus to deliver the sedimentary deposits down to the paper or the print are kind of pipe organ-like in a way. There are all these channels for things to move through and these stacks. But yeah, that's a wonderful instrument. It'll be, yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more recording there and also recording with your jaw harps that you've made.
Yeah, so I'm a jaw harp player, which is probably one of the smallest instruments, and the organ is one of the largest. So there's some. So, Brian, such a pleasure to spend time with you, and thank you for taking so much time out of your schedule to spend time with us at Apalka.
Well, what a pleasure. I'm so glad you invited me to be part of it.
Yeah, and Judy, thank you so much for this wonderful show. It's been just an amazing opportunity. Thank you also, Amy, Griffin, and Natasha. Thank you so much for all your help and setting things up. And so, hey, everybody, there's Friday and Saturday, the last few days to see the show. I'll be around Saturday if you're interested from 12 to 5. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming out. or
Thank you, Terry. Thank
watching.
you, Brian.
All right, thanks.
Okay, have a good one.
Night, everyone.
Night.
Bye.